today's approach to reporting. And thank you for joining us. I know we're in competition with ESPN's Game Day over on the Horseshoe. This is not Game Day. I'm not Lee Corso.
I'm not Kirk.
Not Herb Kirkson. But those of you who are possibly television majors ought to wander over there and take a look at what is involved in creating a live national network sports broadcast. You can do this with about 3 people. You can do this with 1 person like Zach is doing, or you can do it with 100 people as ESPN is doing. But it's quite an elaborate operation when the circus comes to town, as it were, and takes over a chunk of the campus and a downtown street and things of that sort. It does suggest that journalism is not dead, but it's operating in a different kind of environment than a lot of us may perceive it, and yes, even different than business. If we could get Game Day in here, we'd have a cast of thousands and an audience to match. Now, I will say this. I appreciate your coming. I've done national conferences where I was scheduled for a panel discussion, and we had 4 people on the panel and 3 in the audience. And we had a very wonderful, intimate, and engaging conversation. So it's not about numbers, it's about what we're trying to accomplish here. Yesterday we had the initial Baldwin lecture on business journalism. Michelle Lader, the editor and founder of Footnoted, which is a web-based sort of niche operation that monitors SEC reports. It's a refined bit of investigative reporting in a vast landscape of possibilities. And to some degree, we want to explore that landscape in the realm of business and financial journalism. So that's kind of what we'll do. Many students, journalists too, think that business may not be their cup of tea. And I would like them to at least think twice about that. When I meet with prospective journalists, how many of you are journalism majors here? Okay, any of you business majors or minors or anything of that sort? Great, thank you for coming. When I meet with prospective students, I typically ask, what do they want to do? Where do they see themselves 5 years from now? And some of them see themselves over on the Horseshoe doing ESPN Game Day. And then we engage in this little litany of conversation where I say, well, you want to be a sports reporter? And they say, yeah, I really want to be a sports reporter. And I say, what's sports? And I get this somewhat quizzical look in return, as if, what are you, stupid or something? It's football. It's like, you know, NASCAR and that sort of thing. And I said, yeah, but what's sports really? And in some cases, the light goes on. In some cases, the shade remains drawn. But it starts to reflect on, okay, take a look at that NASCAR vehicle. Yeah? What do you see? 4 wheels, a lot of fins and things of that sort, and decals for, you name it, M&M's, U.S. Army, GoDaddy, this, that, and the other thing. It's business. And the bottom line is NASCAR is a billion-dollar business. And professional football and collegiate football are mega businesses, and that's why ESPN is here for Game Day. And that's why when I have this conversation, I'm trying to instill in students, and I know you get it, that sports reporting ultimately is a business. The easy part is the games. You know, the Phillies won 4-0, and he pitched a no-hitter. At the end of the day, this was about getting 40, 50, 60,000 people into a stadium, and even more importantly, getting several million people to watch it and watch the advertising and everything that goes with it. Entertainment is a business. A university, for that matter, is a business. So if you're interested in reporting, and you have one of these specialization fields that really appeals to you, that's wonderful. Whether it's sports or entertainment or politics is a business. I wanted to be a sports reporter too, come to the honest part of it. And then I discovered that politics is a year-round sport. I play it every damn day. And there's a lot of money involved in it. And you don't technically buy votes, but you spend a lot of money to get votes. Anyhow. Last week, and I would add just one final sort of personal note. I took one economics course in college, and for about 10 years when I was covering the White House in Washington, I had to write about the federal budget. I could have used more economics courses in finance and things of that sort. So keep that in mind as you proceed students through your undergraduate and graduate days here. Last week I was in New York for the CEBU conference. CEBU is the Society of American Business Editors and Writers. And it was held at CUNY, which is another acronym, which means City University of New York's Journalism School, which is a graduate journalism program, a young one, only about 4 years old. And talking with one of the faculty members there, asking him what his role was. He says his job is to grow the business journalism component of CUNY's graduate program. And that's a mandate. And he says, Greg David, I think was his name. I looked that down here somewhere. Yes. Said that that's where he really sees the opportunities. Keep that in mind as we proceed here. So let's see if we might create something of a stimulus for business and financial journalism here today. Let me briefly introduce the panel because I believe in brief introductions, and I'll go from my left. Beth Hunt is the manager of editorial operations for American City Business Journals. Andy Shain is assistant business editor of the state newspaper. David Millstead is a columnist and a freelance financial journalist from around Rock Hill. Right?
We're native of Rock Hill, but live in Denver.
In Denver now, thank you. I'm going to ask you more about that detail. Bouyea is publisher of Columbia Regional Business Report and executive editor of SC Biz News LLC. Rather than give you lengthy bio information, I want to ask each of the panelists to do this. Tell us what it is that you do, how you got into business journalism, what was key in preparing you for it, and I'll hold the last question for later in this introductory start here. So Beth, if you'd like to start.
Sure. What is it that I do? I don't know, actually, but I'm very busy at it. My job is as consultant to the 40 editors of the papers in our company. American City is a large part of the Newhouse family of publications. We are part of Advance Publications, which is the same company that has the Condé Nast magazines, Vanity Fair and Vogue, and all of those. The business journals, the 40 business journals, are the primary part of our company, although we also own most of the NASCAR publications that you know. We have the Sports Business Journal, we have the Sporting News. So it's interesting that you would draw the connection because in our company, sports and business, really, there are some real synergies in the way that we operate. How did I get into business journalism? By accident, and I think you will hear that from a lot of people who are in business journalism. I had sort of the same feeling. I graduated from the University of Florida with a degree in magazine journalism, and my goal was to make it to Rolling Stone. Because, you know, I mean, if you look at me, don't I look like someone who ought to be working for Rolling Stone? The thing was, I graduated without really having much reporting experience. I had a lot of fancy writing experience, but to actually get the information necessary, I didn't. And so I decided I needed to go get a reporting job, and I had 2 job offers. One, working for the Orlando Sentinel newspaper in the DeLand Bureau, which, if you know anything about Orlando, it's about as far from the mothership as you can get and still be in the coverage area, covering town council meetings and high school sports. The other one was from a little tiny newspaper that was independently owned called the Orlando Business Journal, but they were going to let me cover tourism in Orlando, Florida. And knowing that the reporter at the Sentinel who covered tourism had been there for 20 years, I figured that I'd get a 20-year start. Maybe spend a couple years, you know, earning my chops and then go off and do what I really wanted to do. 20 years later, almost 21 years later, I'm still here. I was in Orlando for 7 years and then went to be editor of the Austin Business Journal when we bought the paper a long time ago, and then was the editor in Washington. I still say that I ended up in business journalism as a mistake, and I do intend to correct it at some point, except it's been a really good job with a lot of job security. And a chance to cover some really cool stuff. I mean, I covered Disney for very many years. I covered environmental messes and sports business, and lots of really interesting things, and discovered that business journalism done well is not dry and is not boring, and basically is the foundation for every other thing that happens in this world of journalism. So, you know, it looks like I might be here for the duration. I have a great job now working with people who do what I used to do for many years, in helping them recruit and helping them with content development and all of that. And, you know, so I basically get paid to give my opinion all day long and be accountable to almost no one. So, and that is right there the definition of success, I think.
Andy.
So can I have that job?
No,
sorry.
not.
I'm Andy Shain. I'm the assistant business editor at the state newspaper, and again, I'm probably another accidental business journalist. It was the job offered to me out of college, and in Myrtle Beach. Again, speaking of tourism, I worked at the Sun News as a business reporter, and of course I covered tourism, but I also covered development. You know, and many of you know, if you're from South Carolina, back in the 80s and the 90s, that's when a lot of, there was another big boom along the Grand Strand, and I was there to cover it. With the theaters that were coming along, a lot of the big shopping developments that have come along, it was incredible. Again, as Beth was saying, that's where I learned, if you do business, you write it in an interesting way, it's no different than any other story, and it can be kind of exciting. And especially in a town like Myrtle Beach, where it's, you know, tourism based, you have a lot of visitors, you're telling them about things they don't know about, things they may want to do, or where did that restaurant go, where did that store go. And so it was a great way to start in the business, and a great way to start business coverage. And I eventually became business editor in Myrtle Beach. And then I got a job in Charlotte, and I started working with the Charlotte Observer, where I basically brought my business experience to running one of the bureaus out there, the farthest bureau away from Charlotte in Hickory. But, you know, again, this was a town that was starving for business news. It was a textile town. And again, you know, a lot of livelihoods depended on it, and it was, again, the chance to be able to use that experience that I had gotten in Myrtle Beach. Eventually made it down to the mothership. I made it down to Charlotte. I was assistant business editor, got to remake sections, which, if you talk about the ability to put your hand on something and reshape it, business sections seem to want to reinvent themselves about every 4 or 5 years, and you always get a chance to do it. And during the heyday when we had technology sections and separate business tabs once a week, tabloids once a week, you know, it was a great chance to be able to do that, and also see what other folks were doing and try their ideas. I'm you know, proud to say I stole a lot of ideas from magazines while doing that, the idea of just, hey, let's try to build a business magazine. Then I got an interesting opportunity in Charlotte to be the consumer reporter and columnist, and they decided they wanted it to have personality, so I became Mr. Watchdog. And I had a column, and I also did stories just on consumer issues, and you want to talk about things that you do care about. You know, why is my cable bill going up? Why is it that I cannot get an iPhone and anything other than an AT&T system? You know, why did Beth change this policy on returns? I mean, these are things that hit pocketbooks that everybody cares about. This isn't derivatives and whether or not you know, a company's PE ratio is going up and down. So again, I had 5 years of doing that and really connecting with readers, and I think on a level bringing them into the business section when they might not otherwise do so if they had a reason to. And then eventually I came here to Columbia as an assistant business editor. Due to efficiencies, as I like to put it at our paper, I now run the business section, and you know, essentially I'm a Swiss Army knife. I edit, I produce the sections, I write stories, I write columns, I put together a daily newsletter, I manage our web page, and I tweet and I Facebook. So I pretty much try to do a little bit of everything every day to keep folks informed about news around here, business news. And once in a while, I get to kind of keep the consumer focus. You know, a couple weeks ago, I did a really nifty story about this older couple that was being scammed by lotteries that brought out a lot of reactions. So I really enjoyed it.
I do write stories about why companies' PE ratios. I'm a freelance writer in Denver, not necessarily by choice. My career story has got a lot of good luck and a lot of bad luck in it. I was at the Rocky Mountain News, the biggest American newspaper, closed last year, and was there for 8 years, and have not been willing to relocate for another journalism job. You know, I'm just not going to move my family to get back in the game that way. As a freelance writer, my primary client is the Globe and Mail, the national newspaper of Canada, which is kind of a funny story, which I'll get to once I take you back to the beginnings. And I'm a little bit less of an accidental business journalist than I guess most of my fellow panelists. I'm a little bit younger, despite the fact that I have no hair, and I came of age in that era where business journalism was getting a little bit more respectability. There was a time when if you were too drunk to be a sports writer, they put you in the business section. and fortunately, that era passed. And I came out of college in the mid-90s. I started out a political science major and actually was tired of writing essays, so I added an economics major because I wanted something more quantitative. And math was never my best subject. I was good enough at it. I took AP calculus. But once we hit differential equations in college, no way. I was not going any further in math. I'm not one of those math guys. But I'm good enough at it so that I have a rare skill set in newsrooms, which is I could still, you know, add things and divide and multiply and use Excel spreadsheets. And that has been a huge contributor to my success as a journalist, because the vast majority of my colleagues, no matter where I've worked, have been afraid of numbers. And so I've built a nice little niche for myself for being math friendly and for being willing to read those documents that Michelle Later was talking about yesterday. That is also my niche. I sort of did that in Colorado, as Michelle does nationally, just read securities filing after securities filing, because I always say, if the company really wanted you to know, you know, what was going on, they put out a press release. They didn't. It's somewhere in that document, and there are a lot of great stories in there. But over the course of my 15, 16 years in journalism, I have been involuntarily terminated 3 times through layoffs or firings. Half the things I've written for don't exist anymore, which is kind of unusual for someone still in their 30s. The Rocky Mountain News situation was the worst of that. It was a really traumatic experience having 200 people, you know, have their newspaper taken away from them in a single day. We knew it was likely that something bad was going to happen because we were put up for sale in December of 2008. And, you know, the 2 papers in Denver were each losing millions of dollars a quarter, and somebody had to go. In fact, I wrote a column in the summer of 2008 saying one of these newspapers had to close, which was sort of a minor scandal because you don't usually, well, publish something like that, you know, in your newspaper, that you're both failures and one of you has to go. And so it was us, and after the Rocky closed, I was involved in a couple of journalism startups that were premised on the idea that people had to pay for content, and those startups didn't work out. And I did actually take a job with the Globe and Mail in Canada because I'm a dual citizen. My mother's from Canada, and moved out to Toronto and quickly realized that we were going to be worse off as a family if we went to Toronto. It's god-awful expensive up there. I hated the housing, I hated the size of the city, and I wasn't going to ask my wife to give up her job as a school teacher and her friends and the career she loved just so I could keep writing for a newspaper. So God bless us Canadians, they're so nice, because most American organizations, I think if I told them 3 weeks after I showed up, hey, you know, I don't think I'm going to move here after all, they would have said, how quickly can the door hit you in the ass before you get out of here? They like my work enough that I still write for them. I write for them on a freelance basis. I've got no contract. I get paid by the word. And, you know, my income is down 30% from what it was a couple years ago, but I get to pick up my kid from daycare every day, and I'm around the house all the time for him, and it's a great period in his life, and so it's an okay period in mine. And so I still write about PE ratios. I just, you know, it's just better if my story's 800 words instead of 600, because then I get $100 more.
Wow.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Bouyea. I'm the publisher of the Columbia Regional Business Report and the executive editor of SCBiz News, LLC. And what that is we are a business organization much smaller than what Beth has and works with. We had 4 publications in the state of South Carolina. One here, which is 2 years old. I came up here to launch it. Our Charleston Business Journal, which is about 16 years old, and I worked there before coming here. And then our Greenville publication, It's been around about 10 years. We've owned it for 2. We purchased it right when we were launching here. We also have a statewide magazine called SC Biz. It's a quarterly publication, magazine style, as you can imagine. What do I do? Much like Andy, my business card says publisher, but it really should say chief cook and bottle washer, because soup to nuts. I write, I edit, I am involved with layout, production. I manage the sales staff. That's pretty funny. Editorial guy managing sales. So it's a very diverse day that I usually have, and I probably wouldn't change it. I got into this business, unlike Beth and Andy, not by accident, by my own stupidity. I was living in Central Illinois at the time and working for a paper there, and I noticed that there was this tension rising among the company, the one-horse company that pretty much ran the town and employed all the people, and the union. And I said, this has the markings of something big and important, and I'd like to be part of it, so I went and asked my editor if I could cover this. And he said yes, and 6 years later I was still covering that story. It was horrendous. It destroyed the town, relationship, friendships, families. But I loved what I was doing because I was having an impact on the community. And that just launched my career into business journalism because I think Beth said it, business touches everything. And until we are no longer a capitalist society, business runs our lives. Everything from the crime rate to the annual reports that we all have to look at every now and then, whether we want to or not. It's just we're immersed in it. So I took that leap way back in I think it was '91 into business journalism, and covered a lot of stuff, been a lot of places, and I was hired in Charleston to come in as their executive editor to change their focus. They were very much focusing on probably more consumer-oriented business coverage at that time than business coverage. And there's a nuance there, because we're writing to the business owner. We're writing to those managers who are making decisions for their companies as well as for their own personal lives. And that's what we strive to do. So that's pretty much my story.
Thank you. And I think as you engage from these sort of self-introductions, that if not accidental, it's not always the first path that you set out on when you started your journalistic training. Indeed, the notion that you sort of wandered down these paths and stumbled into things. What was the city and what was the corporation that we were
Peoria, and it was Caterpillar.
Caterpillar, that's what I thought. And the story is still problematic.
Well, they've since resolved it, and it ended that the company, in the very first, the way it works is the company presents its proposal to the union, and then the union can vote on it, and they struck it down. 6 years later, the company presented the same proposal, the union accepted, and there was all this crap in between.
So some of the tools not only are the same. If you want to be a sports reporter or a business reporter, you've got to be curious, inquisitive, persistent, determined, a decent writer, and able to stick with it over a lengthy period of time know that it doesn't just end when the final whistle blows. It also requires a sense of humor, as you may have gathered, from each of them. And yes, there is math. We're trying to dispel this notion, David, that journalism can function without math. We do have to. It may not be calculus, but even if you're covering baseball, there are statistics.
But, and I am a huge baseball fan, and I actually credit my baseball fandom for the business writer I am today, because I grew up reading the books of Bill James in the 1980s, and I had a chance at Michael Lewis, the author of Moneyball, who started his career as a bond trader at Salomon Brothers, is known more, maybe more for his business books than sports books, but Michael Lewis and Bill James were at a book signing sitting next to each other, and I said, Mr. Lewis, I've read Liar's Poker in high school, but I have to apologize to you because it was the man sitting next to you, Bill James, who made me the business journalist I am today.
The question I did not ask in that initial setup was, what do you wish you had done to better prepare for where you are now? Let's go the other way, Bob.
Probably taking more math. and quite frankly, and seriously, I would have sat in, if not taken the courses, at least tried to audit some courses in business. There a lot of what I did when I entered into the business reporting world is I educated myself. What do I need to know? Where do I find this information? What's out there? And some of it I just stumbled on by dumb luck, quite frankly. And hence my motto is the harder you work, the luckier you get. So I would have sat in and taken more business courses. It would have been extremely helpful for me and probably saved me a lot of time once I got into this business.
As a journalist, I don't know if there's an answer to that question, because I feel that I obviously have a little bit more of the background than my fellow panelists and a lot of my peers, which is why I've been able to succeed the way I have, you know, with the economics major and the focus early on the numbers and the earnings. And from a bigger picture standpoint, and I regret saying this in front of journalism students, but you know, I've spent 16 years in this business. I'm 38 years old, and I have not been on an American payroll in 18 months. And you know, I ask myself a lot, you know, if I had to do it all over again, would I have done this? You know, why did I apply my financial skills to journalism when I could have come out of the box and been a Wall Street analyst and made multiple times the money? But even now, sort of straddling that line and continuing to explore whether I can make the transition into financial services, I'm not finding things I like in financial services. I believe that investors should not be charged brokerage commissions, and the jobs that are available to me with my limited non-journalism resume all involve selling financial product crap to people, which they may or may not need, and being judged on that and not actually providing good advice to people. So my ingrained journalistic ethics and attitudes are a real obstacle to actually going into the financial services business. So I struggle with that all the time, and it's a very important question because, you know, I'm quasi-unemployed. So.
I think that's really interesting what you just raised there, that whole idea of transitioning from, you know, this business where we're supposed to sort of play things down the middle to a business where, as I said, you're judged on your sales. You know, from my perspective, it's, you know, probably even running a business, being part of a business. I mean, I went to journalism school and came straight out and started reporting and writing, and some of it is that just I can ask and I can learn and I can read and I get a certain amount of knowledge, and in fact that attachment I think does help in my writing and my reporting, but at the same time having some of that attachment would be nice. I sometimes find myself, especially as I've gotten a little grayer, of wondering, you know, what is it like every day to run a business? What are some of the issues? And again, coming out of that with ideas and also just looking at it from a slightly different perspective, you know, might be an issue. I was also a baseball stats geek, so that did help me, and I do know math, and I am probably the math enabler in my newsroom.
a great deal in just helping folks through things, even percentages. If there's one thing I'll say to anybody in this room, if you do not know how to do percentages when you walk out of USC, throw back your degree. I mean, that you just have to be able to figure out a percentage.
Are you doing anything today you didn't learn in 7th grade? Math-wise?
I think you're probably, I mean, besides using Excel, no.
Yeah, no.
I mean, yeah, of course, yes, I'm old enough that, yeah, I was still on the stuff typed out.
Hot type.
Exactly, and also the computers were that way too. You had the programs. Exactly. So, exactly, the calculators were this big, and that was the small one. But yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point, and really it's just, and I was a math guy up until high school, and then I became an English guy, so I was able to combine it. But it's just the one thing. It's just if I had to sort of pick maybe a pet peeve, which is the whole idea is that whether you're covering a city hall, whether you're covering the budget of your sports team, the budget of city hall, the budget of the university, you've got to be able to do the basic math and also be able to basically use an Excel spreadsheet. It's not that tough, really, and it's just a little practice. But again, I guess my hope is maybe to run a business one day, and maybe I'll do that as my next, second step when I grow up.
The answer to the question, is there anything I would have done to prepare, is no. And the reason for that is that if I had had any idea what I was getting myself into, I would not have done it. Seriously. I mean, this is absolutely not what I had planned. And to be honest with you, it's been awesome, but I still really don't think of myself as a financial journalist, as a business journalist. What I think of myself as is a recovered reporter who went into editing and got a chance to work with some really great reporters and make them better. So my path has been different, really, maybe not so different than everybody's, but what I really, I mean, I got to cover Disney, and there's a lot of things about Disney that are very financially driven. However, when you work for a weekly newspaper, in a local market that is really focused on the economic development impact of the Walt Disney World complex, the earnings of the company are sort of inconsequential when you think about land transactions and union disputes and layoffs and hirings and traffic problems and all of that that's very specifically local. So when it came to looking at Disney as a company, it was really more a corporate citizen than anything. And to do that, I covered it by forming relationships with people. And that's sort of what I've done my whole career, is base my coverage and my reporting on sources and relationships with them and having them help me through the stuff that David Millstead now helps me with on the board of Cebu, actually. And then I decided to become an editor because I had some really, really bad editors. And I figured that, maybe I wouldn't be that good at it, but I couldn't be that bad. And what I discovered was that that's actually my talent, is getting the best out of people who are sort of genetically predisposed to not giving you their best. And not being able to see what they're capable of doing, or sometimes thinking they're far more capable than they really are. And so for me, that's where it sort of ended up. But I always had people like David to help me through that part, because it is very important to either have those skills or know someone who does.
So now we have sort of teed up the title question here, and in Beth's comments about corporate citizenship, and Bob's about being the sales manager as well as the writer-editor and bottle washer. Let me come to that central question as we posed it. Inform, investigate, advocate. What are, as you see them, the most relevant roles or the dominant roles that you face, each in your own way and each in your own medium? To further elaborate, Michelle Letter is the investigative reporter. She burrows into the SEC filings to find that nugget that becomes the aha kind of moment. Bob, if I may suggest, on the other hand, you have a sort of community role, and there are any number of community-oriented business journals. I grabbed one off the top of my desk. It's not yours. What? This Greater Columbia Business Monthly, but it could just as easily be yours. And a lot of them seem to be cheerleaders. and we've hired this person and they're wonderful, and that sort of thing. Andy is at a newspaper, and the newspaper has certainly the informing role and the investigative role, but it also has a community cheerleader sense of responsibility. You want the community to succeed, so you like to write when somebody offers 600 new jobs. That's a good headline for us. Take that, but we'll make it, since we thrive only on sports metaphors, we'll make this a jump ball, and anybody who wants to get in on that can do so.
I guess I'll go ahead and jump forward. You know, it's a little bit of, I mean, from a newspaper's perspective, it's a little bit of everything. You have the constituency I try to serve is, you know, the stay-at-home mom who wants to know about the recall of a toy, to the investor who wants to know about the results of SCANA, the only Fortune 500 company based in South Carolina, to the Chamber of Commerce officials who want to tout the new jobs or tout the new the expansion of a local business, and then also small business owners who have their own issues, as well as just wanting sometimes to announce the fact that they exist. It's a little bit of everything is what I find myself doing as far as, you know, the question, you know, advocate, investigate, and inform. You know, and it's a balancing act that we try to do every day. And you know, one of the things, as I think as part of my intro, I bring to this is a sort of consumer view of things, is that I want more folks to read the business page than just, you know, the people who want to see the stock tables. And, you know, I may have mentioned PE ratios, but they are very important. And obviously, I hear from investors all the time about, you know, about various issues. And so, it's again being that Swiss Army knife of being able to put all those hats on and do it well and juggle and not lose too much of your hair or your brains while doing it. The one thing I'd also just say is that, you know, being a business journalist, I feel like it's advanced journalism. I think there's a skill in writing about City Hall, there's a skill in writing about a ball game, there's a skill in covering politics, but I think you put that all together when you take the jobs that we've had and be able to do that, and also blend in the numbers and the effects and all of that. You know, it's like, as I said, a good business journalist is like reading a good sports journalist. It's someone who doesn't just tell you that the Gamecocks beat Alabama 42-3, but why did that happen? And yes, that's my prediction.
I would jump on to what Andy just said about it being advanced journalism. I think, you know, your question was investigate.
Inform, investigate, and advocate.
And advocate. I think the answer to that is yes. And what it requires is that you not only be able to gather information, but you be able to distill it as well. And I think, you know, sometimes when you talk about that in a room full of, you know, budding journalists or, you know, balding journalists, you get into this big discussion about, you know, it's not our job to, you know, help to tell people what to think, and you know, and the fact of the matter is that's just caca. We make decisions every day. We base things on our own opinions. We base things on our own, you know, biases. We try to put in perspective. I mean, we try to put into place checks and balances for those things. But simply the act of simply deciding to do a story or not do a story has, you know, is inherently biased. I mean, that's just the way it is. I think what good, solid business journalism is being able to gather the information and connect the dots in a meaningful way, and then be willing to stand behind it when you write it. So, you know, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's not enough just to write a story about it walking like a duck and quacking like a duck. You have to be okay with saying it's a duck. And here's the ramifications of it being a duck. And this is what you need to know going forward if you are either interested in a duck or not interested in a duck.
And if I can add, and be willing to stand behind it when the company calls and says, why did you call this
why
a duck?
Why did you call us a duck?
Why
We're not a duck, we're a goose. No, you're a duck. And here's why. I think the other important thing is you have to know who your audience is. And you have to be unapologetic and completely selfish in serving them. Period, paragraph. I think, you know, the road out of the journalism industry right now is littered with organizations that lost that. It's one of the reasons that you guys had someone like Michelle here yesterday. She is absolutely laser focused on who she serves and what she gives them. And she doesn't do anything else. There are a million other stories out there to be done, but not by her. And, you know, so if you look at an organization like American City, or you look at a daily newspaper or whatever, you have to go back to the very beginning and say, who is it we serve and what do they want from us? For us, it's a really simple question. Our readers want one of three things. They want the information that's in our paper to either help them grow their business, help them manage their career, or help them make more money. Those three things. If we do a story and the story doesn't do one of those three things, tell them who to do business with, who not to do business with, new kinds of things they need to know for their companies, figure out who's going in, who's going in next door so they can plan for expansion or not, then we haven't done our job. And there's lots of, important stories about homeless shelters and, pet shelters and whether the boys club and girls club is doing, and that's awesome. Somebody's got to do those stories, but it isn't us. And so when a reporter comes to an editor of a business journal and says, I'm thinking about doing a story about this, the first question we ask is, who is this going to help and how? If it doesn't help the people who read our paper or the people we want to read our paper, and we can't clearly define how, then we don't do the story.
David, how do you approach that from a freelance position?
Well, I was going to say, that's actually why daily newspapers, and this is not a panel on the media business itself, but I think that's one of the big problems that daily newspapers have, is that the audience is too large and diffuse and has too many interests. They can't answer that question properly, and that's why they're getting killed. But my short summary of the problems of newspapers. Thank you. Yes. The big picture question, I inform and investigate were no-brainers for me, but I struggle with the advocate word, because I don't know, who we're really supposed to advocate for, because I think business journalists are as much a part of the system as they are outside the system, and just like sports reporters don't often step back and say, why are we paying attention to all these games, these athletes? Business journalists don't step back and say, is this whole capitalism thing working out or not? And that's, I'm as guilty as anybody. Most of my stories are about company X, and here's what the analysts are saying about it, and is it priced right or is it not? And for a lot of days, I wonder if we wouldn't just be more effective at allocating capital by throwing darts and firing everybody on Wall Street, because I don't think that they provide anywhere near the value that they're getting paid, And fortunately or unfortunately, the quote-unquote business journalist who's had the most impact on the national debate in the last 2 years is Matt Taibbi of Rolling Stone, because he just stepped back and said, all these people on Wall Street are a bunch of douchebags. And he abandoned all pretense of objectivity or fairness or balance and just ripped them a new hole. And most of us don't do that because we're bound by what we were taught about ethics and fairness and balance, and we just don't step out and question things fundamentally. So at first I was going to say, oh well, we advocate for investors, but I'm not sure how much we do.
Bob, David's douchebag phrase is probably not one we would read in your magazine.
Depends on if it's a direct quote or a couple weeks ago, we had we do events as well as part of, that's another one of the things I do, moderate events. And we had the new commanding officer from Fort Jackson was in. And he was talking about leadership. And the one thing that he said that stuck with me, that Beth talked about, know your mission. Whether you are a business leader or you're leading troops in the battle, you got to know your mission. And that's what we try to stick to as well. I mean, we know what we want to do, and we try to execute it. We have gone off on branded trails. And when we feel that, we're getting away from our mission, we're bound to fail. And we typically do. And then we pull back, refocus, and go forward. To the core question, do we advocate? Yes. Do we inform? Yes. Do we investigate? Yes. And it depends on which vehicle we're using at the time. Because we put out a newspaper every 2 weeks. Our newspaper isn't really news, but our daily news product is. Our daily news product is where we inform. Here's what's happening today in the business world. 2 weeks from now we'll come out with our paper, And we will have stories about more analysis of the news, trends. Not so much news unless it's just happening right there, but then we have the delay because we have to send it to the printer and they send it back. It doesn't hit the streets for a while. We don't have a printing press in our backyard. So, you know, we have this delay and we have to be able to manage that in the best way to achieve our mission, and that is to inform the business community of the business news that's affecting them. So, and then our other products, do we advocate? Yes, we advocate. We have editorial pages which we advocate. Our tagline on our magazine is that we are the engine driving economic growth in South Carolina. That's a pretty clear message. We're advocating for South Carolina. We're not advocating for any one particular organization, but we are advocating for the state.
Does the advocacy in your case ever get in the way of the investigatory role or vice versa?
No. We do keep it separate. We have places for that. You know, most of our advocacy comes on our editorial page. And that's where we take the stand. That's where our voice is. This is the policy that's right for South Carolina to grow business. So we do keep them separate.
You know,
go ahead,
can I just
please.
throw something in?
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting. David mentioned the word fairness, and sort of in the same paragraph as having trouble figuring out where the advocacy comes in. And I would argue that the advocacy comes in on the fairness. And just go with me for a minute. You know, there's been a lot of hand-wringing after the economic crisis and the housing boom, bust, and all of that sort of thing about, you know, did the business press do what it should have done? You know, were we somehow culpable or somehow involved in, or did we just stand by and let it happen? And, you know, were we doing our jobs? And I think the very idea that we're even having that conversation tells us what people are looking for from us, which is not simply to regurgitate the information, but to distill it in a way that is right and fair. You know, you brought up Matt Taibbi, and you know, you could really argue that he kind of, I mean, he's out on the skinny branches, frankly. However, you don't get a whole lot of complaining about what he's written, because the fact is, you know, all he really said is, this is a really big duck. And I think just by the very nature of, you know, I mean, I've seen panel after panel of hand-wringing. You know, did we cover it right? Did we do enough analysis? Were we paying enough attention? Were we, you know, it basically shows you that people don't want anymore the objectivity as we sort of have always defined it. They're not looking to, you know, I don't know whether they don't have time to make their own decisions anymore, whether they really are looking to be led by the hand. But the fact of the matter is, people want us to tell them, you know, we've gathered this information, and best we can tell, this is what's going on. And I think the most successful people, you know, as David said, those are the ones who are doing that, right or wrong. It seems to be what is making, what's reaching readers, and you know, we have to reach readers, regardless of what the medium is, or we die.
Andy, what kind of pressure does the state get in terms of business coverage?
It's not what you would think. Fortunately, I feel lucky in that sense, and if it is, I can defend it with the fairness. I've written, you know, we talk about investigating. You know, sometimes I think we tend to think of like the Rolling Stone pieces, or you know, what we used to call the 3-month takeout. You know, the reporter didn't do anything but a project, and then 3 months later, boom, there's a big story. You know, what we have to do now is do it in everyday writing, and obviously you do it, you know, with every one of your columns. I mean, the idea that you're not just taking the news release or taking the earnings report, but you're looking at the numbers, you're borrowing down, you're doing a little bit of research on top of that. That's investigation. I mean, you know, it's not 3 months, but it's, you know, 3 hours, and that's what we have to do to help the public, I think, and help readers learn a little bit more. And one of the things I've been doing is looking at, you know, banks that have been basically told by regulators, you know,
fix your bottom lines or things might get worse. We've had 4 bank closings in South Carolina this year. We have about another 8 or 9 banks that are probably about 1 step away from that, and then several banks that have gotten sort of the initial warnings. And I've really made a point of keeping a list updated up for it, and every few months saying this is where we stand. The banks hate it. They say, you know, you're painting the industry in a bad light. Well, tough. It's a tough industry, and I feel like the public should know where their bank stands, or you know, and people are not just having, of course, money in checking accounts and savings accounts, but they're investors in these banks as well. So I think I'm informing the public of something that basically is in the public domain, but takes a little bit of effort to kind of scoop together and put in one spot. And we talk a lot about analysis, and I'd like to hear what David has to say about, you know, how he pieces that together, but I find that's what I'm drawn to. I know that as a news guy, I know the headlines. What I want to know is why, the where, and the how. And I guess I'll give you the one example I go by, and one of my passions is that I'm into English soccer, and I'm an Arsenal fan. I'm a Gooner, and that's what they're called. And I don't really read the game stories. What I read is all the blogs and the analysis of the games. And even sometimes I'm not even seeing the games. They were occasionally on television, but they're not. And I also find myself finding the same way with the Gamecocks. I saw that the Gamecocks won 42-3. I want to know how the heck did they figure out, you know, how to stop the running game? How did they figure out how to do that? It's the same deal with politics, with business, with City Hall, with anything else that I'm really more interested almost in understanding that next level, have that expertise. And as long as we can keep that expertise, I think we'll have a place. Once we start losing it, start regurgitating press releases, we're done.
David, please
people
go ahead.
ask me how I get my stories, and I have trouble actually answering that question a lot of the time, because if you with experience, you just recognize things more easily, and you find things more easily. I just published a column in the Globe and Mail last Saturday, and I'll try to keep the story short, but I was asked to look at a specific company in Canada because their executives had sold some stock under a certain circumstance. I looked at that situation. I didn't find it to be as scandalous as the person with an agenda who brought to our attention. But in the course of doing research for that, I went into the company's documents to find some information about how they compensate their executives. And again, this is a Canadian company. Canada's a small country. It's 1/10 the size of the US, population-wise. And I looked, and the company had not been doing well, and I looked at the document, and they said, in setting the pay, the compensation for our CEO, we used this peer group of 25 American companies. The American economy is a lot bigger than the Canadian company. So I looked at the companies, and this is a company that in Canada, it's worth about $5 billion. Their peer group for setting compensation included companies like Kraft and Archer Daniels Midland, companies that were $50 billion in size. And so I went through and I actually pulled I took the 25 names, I pulled their revenue figures, I pulled their compensation figures. I used a database for it, so I didn't have to go through 25 documents to do it. And I looked and I said, look, they picked a peer group that's inflating the guy's pay because they're comparing him to bigger companies, bigger CEOs, and American pay, Americans pay more than Canadians. And that was the subject of my column. And to buttress this, I picked out a couple of companies that were similar in size to them in Canada. It confirmed my suspicion. The guy was getting twice as much. And then a similarly sized companies in Canada. But I've read a lot of documents that are like that before. I have familiarity with how CEO pay is set, and it was a flag to me. I immediately saw, okay, if you're a Canadian using 25 big American companies as a peer group, you're going to have your pay too high. And that was the column, and it ran on Saturday.
And did you notice that the information gathering simply informed the story? The quote-unquote reporting informed the story, but David actually wrote the story.
Yeah, there was no press release,
Well, but what I also mean is you didn't just go out and say, this is how much this guy makes, this is how much the other people, and sort of just leave it out there.
Yeah.
And I think traditionally that's what we've done, is we just, and typically we'll go find, there's 99 people who feel one way, there's one guy who feels the other way, but journalistic standards require that we give them each the same amount of space and the same amount of credibility. And I think that's also a problem. You know, I don't know about, you know, what life is like at your house for Thanksgiving dinner, but when I go to visit my parents who are just fed up with me and all the people that I, you know, hang with, that's part of the reason why. They want to know why that crack pot always gets the same amount of space. And, you know, if you think about it, it's really kind of silly. You know, and that's where we've come. We have to start making those, not have to start, we have to make those determinations. And just decide that that does not balance out a story simply having the other side.
Well, you could call this bias, but all through my history of writing about compensation, I refused to quote people who claimed that there was no way to value a stock option. That's objectively false, and I'm not going to quote somebody saying that even if that's the other side of the story. You're not my story if you say that, because it's wrong.
Let's open this up for questions from the floor. We're having an interesting discussion here, and I've got an arm's length of other questions, but if you have questions, this would be a good time to start. If not, I'll just keep having my little conversation. Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Yeah, you go ahead.
You know, it's kind of a paradox here. At the same time that business was booming, that business interest was booming. Business necessarily hasn't been booming, but it's become so much a part of our lives. Mainstream media has managed to ditch a lot of its business coverage, especially newspapers. In fact, that's where some of the first layoffs occurred before the bottom fell out. Why do you think?
Wow. Turn the camera on. You know, it's no, it's okay. Let me. Partly, you know, it's tough because
you don't have to think about this.
No. What it is that we don't drive ads. Okay, I mean, you don't see any ads in our. You see very few ads in our section. Not unlike the sports section, unlike the A section. I mean, so it's an easy spot. That's why we reduced the number of stock listings. That's why it's an easy place to hit. And you know, I just think that's what it comes down to. I mean, there's a reason why we have a number of sports writers, because there's the interest in the Gamecocks, and when we have obviously folks who cover politics, because this is a political town. I would say that would be different maybe in another town if we had sort of like like Charlotte, you know, obviously dominated by the banks, but I just think it tends to be, you know, where do you generate revenue? Where do you get bang for your buck?
Yeah, but it wasn't just the state. I mean, this happened in much of the industry. They went to the business departments first and gutted them in many cases.
It seemed that way, and you know, and I think the other part of it too is that there are a lot of editors who don't understand, I think, where business coverage stands, how important it is, and also the idea that in the end, as I said, you're getting rid of the folks who do advanced journalism, who can, you know, who can make a whole bunch of other moves in addition to, you know, covering companies covering economic development and so forth.
Print. Is print dying? Is it dead? And my answer has always been no. It's just changing, and it's changing for more along the lines of niche, less like what Andy is working in. You know, being all things to all people. Really, you know, who's been in Barnes and Noble recently and gone back to the magazine racks? Seems to me there's at least as many magazines, if not more, today, and they're all niched. I mean, you got men's health, women's health, kids' health.
Dog's health, cat's health.
Yeah, exactly. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. We saw the opportunity, even before we knew that, you know, Andy, that you guys were getting squeezed up here, we just saw it as a good business opportunity to come into all the major communities in our state that are viable to do so. Obviously, Greenville, Spartanburg, excellent place for business. Columbia, excellent place for business. Even though it's a political town, that's where a lot of decisions are made that affect businesses. So it's a great place for us to be. And Charleston is a great place. I mean, with all business activity. You know, that's one of the first places that when a business comes to South Carolina, they look at Charleston because they want to know about the port. How can I get my product in and out of here?
Yeah, exactly.
What about
Nicholas Neglipotti at MIT says journalism isn't dead, paper is dead. Obviously, the migration to electronic. Any of you have any thoughts on that?
I disagree with it. It's not dead. It might be dying. I think what has to happen is we all have to stop thinking about how we deliver what we deliver and just deliver it however people want it. You know, if they want it on their iPad, give it to them on their iPad. Sell them a subscription on their iPad and call it a subscription. If they want it online, give it to them online and do the same thing. You know, to be honest with you, I hope that paper goes away for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that it's better for the earth. But I don't, you know, at this point, I mean, American City is a really big company, and 99.9% of our revenue is still on paper. You know, we have a very, very fast-growing, very vibrant web presence, and it's maybe 99.5% now is still in our
The problem
and it's not dropping.
We should give people the information they want the way they want it, except for free.
Except,
not for free.
Yeah, we won't give it to you for free.
And that's been the problem with the daily newspaper industry. We listen to these, not Negroponte so much, but a lot of these media futurists who really did not give a damn whether we lived or died, and we followed them into this trap of giving away the content online and contributing to the commodification of news.
Yes.
And the reason Beth's public company is successful is that people still perceive value in business publications.
Well, and we have never given it away for free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there was a time in our company's history where, you know, all of us out in the markets thought that the white-haired old men in Charlotte were crazy for not giving it away, and they kept saying to us, look, you know, if you give away your product for free, then you don't meet the definition of professional. Like, a company that doesn't make money is not a safe place to work. It's just, that's the way it is.
Yeah,
so
tell me that.
if people, I mean, if people want it for free, you know, then, you know, what you have to work on is changing their perception of the value of it. You know, I think it'll be interesting to watch the New York Times. You know, arguably, you know, a publication to which a lot of people attach value, but for a long time, they've given it away for free. And let's see how valuable people think it is once they pull it back behind the paywall.
Betty,
I think I'm probably, even though I work for the journalism school, I'm an average consumer because I like sports, I like politics. I will pay for the New York Times online crossword puzzle, but I get to read the news for free. In my opinion, I'd like you to respond to this, and Andy, you'll probably want to start first. I think, in my personal opinion, from people that I talk with, who are just the general consumers, we get such mixed emotions or mixed signals from papers like Take the State and Gamecocks Online. Part of me feels like you're telling me something about the state when you will charge me to read sports online, but I can read your news, your business stuff. I read your article this morning on Michelle Leader online for free, but I have to pay. I have to pay to get my sports. So I think that's the problem. We're getting mixed signals from everybody, and so now I just don't, you know, don't know what to think about this.
And the Times is going to face the same thing because they're only going to take part of what they're doing next year behind a paywall. And then I think eventually it's all going to go behind a paywall. I think the feeling is we've given it away for so long. We've got to make it. It's got to be gradual to do that. And we'll put what people want most. In our case, well, in the case of the Times, crossword puzzle, and eventually the op-ed pieces. And I think it's the arts. What was the other piece of that?
I think they're still cagey.
I know op-ed. I think the op-ed is going behind. But you know, for instance, but in our case, it was the Gamecocks is what we had to sell, and that's why we're doing that. That's why we're trying this. You know, obviously, for folks who work in business news for more than 5 minutes, we all were pulling our hair out when we were noticing we were giving away this for free and thinking this isn't going to be good because at some point we all knew, you know, the paper's going to draw down and this was going to be the way people want it. And you know, the day that we start charging, we put everything at front state behind the paywall. It's going to be interesting to see how folks react because I wonder, beyond the age of readers who like the paper, you know, want to take it with them, have we really connected with the readers who want to get an iPad subscription, who are going to, you know, get an online or an iPhone subscription or whatever and do it that way, or do the micropayments and are willing to pay, you know, 25 cents to read my column. And again, I think I also can imagine that the micropayments are going to be
you know, it's going to be $2 to read the Gamecock stories and 2 cents to read Andy Shain and 10 cents to read the City Hall story and whatever. So it'll be interesting to see the futures, but I think, you know, in order for me to have a job and for David to find hopefully a new one, that we're going to have to pull that all behind the wall and make a lot of people unhappy for a period of time. But I think eventually
Well,
they'll come back.
otherwise, we'll niche everybody. I'll pay
Exactly.
for my sports here, and I'll pay for my crossword puzzle here. So
Exactly.
you're going to have to increase the quality of everything to get me to pay for everything.
And that's, and you know, you raise an excellent point of what Doug was saying, which is as we've cut the newsroom, I think that's quality has suffered. And again, if I call it the box of cornflakes, if I go to the grocery store and I see the Kellogg's cornflakes and I pull it out and it's half full, and I say, oh, this is a fluke, and then I continue and the box is half full, it's still Kellogg's cornflakes. What am I going to do? I'm going to go buy someone else's cornflakes, and I feel like that's what we're doing in the news business, is that we're giving them half or a third of what we used to give them, and expecting them to pay the same price, and at some point, you know, readers get smart, and that's why, as I said, I think we need to continue with that quality, however we can do it, and however we can accomplish it.
And the little label on the box that says product may have shifted.
It's the state is a brand. It's a great brand in this state, and it's been interesting to see how it's been treated the past few years.
I think there's a correlation between your two questions, actually. You were talking, you know, and I do think that I think eventually you are going to pay for your sports over here and your crossword puzzle over here and your business coverage over here. I think my own opinion is we've gone too far down the line. And if you think about the way you read things and the way, you know, you sort of parcel out your time, that's kind of how you do it at this point. I think that daily newspapers that figure that out and allow you to subscribe to this part or allow you to subscribe to this part and sort of let those decisions be driven by revenue and things, I think they'll be all right. But I do think there's a correlation. I think if you have to be all things to all people, which a daily newspaper really does, you're caught between a rock and a hard place at this point. You can't pay for all things to all people, but yet that's still your mission. And you know, as a lover of daily newspapers, I sure hope they figure it out. But
isn't that also a bad omen in the sense that if we're left with the per piece option, we'll pay for the sports and the crossword puzzle, and maybe not for Andy and the rest of you, in the same way that when we get cable television with 300 stations on it, we only watch about a dozen, but the others are there. And this has been much of the discussion about cable television. Should it be on an almost a pay-per-view? It would put 250 of those stations completely out of business.
It seems to be, it depends on the value that you brought to your publication before you put it behind the paywall. Mm-hmm. If people see the value of what you're doing and they want to continue to receive that, then they're going to pay for it. There's one of our business publication in Western Australia, of all places, and they don't give anything away for free. And they have created such a value of their product, people are paying a tremendous amount of money just to read it. And so that's where, you know, as a business publication, we need to be, because we're going to go there too someday. We're going to let a few others go first, but we will be there.
Yeah, I was involved in a big debate about this topic on Facebook just the other day. You can imagine I have a lot of unemployed journalists as friends. And the Grand Junction, Colorado Sentinel put their paper behind a paywall a couple days ago. And you had, you know, you had the Sentinel, oh, well, their traffic's going to go down 90%, good luck with that. It's like, well, you know, a print newspaper shifting a reader from print to web traffic is an unprofitable move. So who gives a flip if the traffic goes down in that regard? And my point to these people is, look, I'd rather go out of business charging for content than go out of business giving it away for free.
Well, and the other thing is the news aggregators. I mean, the putting it behind a paywall, and the Greenville News, as some of you may know, has gone behind a paywall, is that, you know, let alone we're giving it away for free, but of course you have Gawker and the Daily Beast.
And they're making tons of money off of our report.
Exactly, and putting it behind a wall to get our exclusive report, you know, John O'Connor, who covers the State House for us, and, the
with apologies to Jim Davenport, is, I think, the best state house reporter in the state. There's a value in that, and I think, you know, I can understand why John's story could go behind a paywall. I think when we have exclusives and we have things, I can sort of, on business or in City Hall or whatever, that could be something that you pay for, because you're only going to get it from us. And again, we have that brand, but the problem is, and Bob can, you know, Bob can speak to this too, is that if we have the bodies to be able to provide that content to drive you, and that's why the Wall Street Journal can go behind the paywall, because they have that quality, they have that mass of resources to be able to do it, and that's why I think the New York Times will be able to get away with it as well. I get away with it, but actually, you know, make money on it.
A dozen years ago, I was a business editor of the Herald up in Rock Hill, and I was asked in some chamber function, are you afraid of the internet as a competitor to newspapers? I said no, wrongly. And the answer I gave was also wrong, because I said, no website is going to hire 50 people to cover York County, South Carolina. And the reason that answer was wrong was because I didn't understand, like virtually every other journalist, and including also the publishers and the owners of the papers, didn't understand the economics of a newspaper, which is it was in the audience business. And in the newsroom, we liked to convince ourselves that the paper was financially healthy because all these people were buying it to read our articles. They weren't. There were people buying it to learn where the garage sales were. There were people buying it to get a new automobile. There were people buying it for the real estate ads. And when that, well, crosswords economy, when that all got broken down and disaggregated, there wasn't, the newsroom subsidy went away. We were being subsidized all those years by people who did not care about news. And now that the subsidy is broken away, the people who actually care about news are shocked at what it actually costs to support it and are hesitant to pay for it.
Yes, Karen.
Have you felt that the recent economic recession has attracted a new readership for you, or is it always kind of just been, is it the same people that have always been reading the business section or the business journals?
That's a good question. I think in my case, being, again, that I'm trying to serve a wider audience, I would be, you know, an audience. I think there are more people who are gravitate to the section because I've brought more consumer news to it. I think much to the chagrin of folks who would prefer I put the Chamber of Commerce news or more in-depth economic news. Again, I'm trying to balance it a little bit. I mean, on Sunday, I'm running stories about, you know, how to choose your health plan at work, and then also a really good story about dissecting some of the problems that happen with, you know, the economic downfall. So
have you run a story about how to sell a home without a realtor?
Yeah.
No. Once or twice.
No.
No.
Well, actually, I take it back. We have actually run those, but you get reaction.
Have you run a story about how to get the best price for your car at a car sales?
I do that on occasion. Yeah, that's good. But, you know,
most newspapers won't do those.
No, I'll do those. But I mean, you hear back, and again, and you bring raise something, and Bob can maybe even address this a little bit. I don't sell ads. I want ads in my newspaper, and I of course want to keep feeding my family and I like electricity. It's cool. But you know, at the same time, I feel like I have a readership to serve, and that if I don't do that, and again, if I'm just printing happy Chamber of Commerce news, you're going to turn me off or stop subscribing to me. And if I, you know, at the same time, I'm not fair. You know, I sit here and I say corporations are bad, and I take that point of view. Again, that's going to turn another segment off. So it's a little bit of that balancing act. But yes, I feel like because I've tried to put those stories on my page, I've even wrestled them away from other sections. Yeah, I think it's helped bring a readership to the page, and maybe they're reading some other things or doing some other things in general. Also, I feel like there's new investors out there. I'm hearing calls from folks who, I'm getting into the market because everyone says stocks are so low or there's some good value there. So I think that's also beginning to happen, that people are trying their hand at that.
And I think that goes back to knowing your reader. And Andy's is right on what he's doing, because he's business to consumer information. I'm not going to do those kind of stories because I'm business to business. Not that there's anything wrong with it. He's doing what he should be doing, and I've got to do what I've got to do in that I'm talking to the business leaders of the community. So that's sort of how we differ. And I'm not going to compete with him on those type of stories. We will compete on the
ads.
Yeah. Some. Yeah. Not.
But we do compete on more of the business to business kinds of things. The law firms that are merging and
exactly, and who's coming with new businesses coming to town. Those kind of yeah. But as far as the consumer, that's leave it to
we tell our reporters, if you got into this business to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, you need to know that we are the comfortable. Like, we're the man, we're going to cover the man, we're going to talk about how the man's making more money. If that's not comfortable to you, that's okay, but you need to know that. That's what we do. It's what we do. Sometimes the man does bad things to the other man, but the fact is that that's what we do. We help people make more money, and we don't apologize for it. And you know, there are a lot of journalists that are uncomfortable with that, but the fact is that's just, it's what we do.
We also try to help, I'm sure you do too, help the businesses promote the things that are going on inside their businesses. And even you know, we call our section back of the book in the house, oh, this is back of the book, but it's not because it's less important.
No.
It's highly important, and probably one of the first sections that a lot of our readers go to because they're looking for leads. And that's our business briefs, and that's our who got promoted, and our people section, and all that. I remember when I learned my first day at the Charleston Business Journal how important that was, because I was in the people section. And all of a sudden, I got all this mail. Hey, welcome to town. I'm this insurance guy over here. Do you need this? Let's get together. Let's talk. Aha.
You know what?
My aha moment, the people section.
The business of business is business.
Right. Specifically for your question, I think generally there is more interest in investing stories when it's easier to make money.
Yeah.
I mean, when the markets are choppy or headed straight into the toilet, there's less interest in the investing section in some ways, because you know everybody loves to find a hot stock and have it go up 20% in 4 months, and when that's not generally happening, I think CNBC's ratings have been down in the last 2 years from where they were before, and so there is that loss of readership, I think.
And that's actually through no fault of their own. I mean, how much time do you want to spend watching a channel where everything is sour? You know what I mean? Where the market's going down and now they're
Well, no, by the way, you don't
effects
have
of the
any money
downturn.
anymore either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Questions? Any out there? Any questions up here that you'd like to fling at each other?
I want to know how many of you guys are thinking about going into business journalism.
None.
None now.
Right.
Sports
There's
journalism.
I mean, as you know, Beth and Bob attest, there's a future in it. I mean, the idea is that and there's a future, obviously, in mainstream newspapers too, but definitely in the niche publications. I mean, you know, and in the end, there are going to be people who are going to be in business. They're going to have stores. They're going to run corporations. They're going to want leads. They're going to sell stuff.
Yeah, information that helps people make money will always be valuable,
Yeah,
as Beth will be happy to tell you.
indeed.
And that's one of the questions I do want to ask. What is the growth potential? Where do you see it? Is it in niche publications? Is it online? Where would you be looking?
I would be looking more specialized and more specialized and more specialized. You know, and I think that's true of anything. It's, you know, it used to be people subscribed to Rolling Stone and they read, you know, a quarter of it for the, you know, guitar reviews or whatever. But now there's a guitar magazine and there's, you know, 50 guitar websites and, you know, there's guitar forums and blogs and all that stuff. And all of a sudden you don't have to wade through all the stuff about hip hop and all that stuff to get to your guitar information.
Well, how about even album reviews?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's you know, I think
Dating myself.
I would, album?
What's it?
I'm sorry.
Is that where you put photos?
MP3 music reviews. Yeah, but don't.
I mean, the more and more, you know, if you go, Bob was talking about going to Barnes & Noble, and well, if you go to Barnes & Noble anymore, but, and looking at the magazines. You know, there's like 55 new magazines for knitting, and there are different kinds of knitting. And there are different, you know, processes of knitting, and they're put out by this knitting needle maker, and like, I mean, if that doesn't tell you that things are so, and they're thick too, they're not, these are not, you know, tiny little volumes that, you know, and they might come out twice a year, they might, you know, but if you look at, you know, I mean, that's where it's going. Think about how you read things, you know, I have 4 or 5 things that I go to every day, MSNBC.com, CNN.com, Slate, Salon, and, you know, the Daily Beast. Those are my 5 national things. It's where I get all of the news that I need. And then everything else that I go to is very specifically targeted to what matters to me. You know, I'm the mom of a 5-year-old, so I read a couple of mommy blogs. My daughter and I bead together, so I have beading things. I'm a, like all of the rest of us, an aspiring, book author. And so I have specific things that I do for that. I'm working on my MFA. But they're very, very specialized and very specific. And if I discover at one of those something that gets me even more specialized into what specifically I'm paying attention to, then I might switch over to that and get rid of this one. I think it's just getting more and more specific.
If you are hiring, when you are hiring, what would you look for?
We are hiring.
We are hiring. Everybody hear that? We are hiring.
That's right.
Beth?
Email me.
That's right. We look for competitive spirit. People who want to know something, who have a sense of entitlement for information, who aren't afraid to ask for it, who will look you straight in the eye when they talk to you, who can put a price tag on their value. One of the things that will get you, it will end your interview quickly is if I ask you how much you want to make and you tell me it's negotiable. Because everything's negotiable, but I want to know how much you want to make. I think you have to be strong and quick and curious and relentless.
What are you hiring for?
Reporters in Orlando, Nashville, Birmingham, Dayton, Washington, San Francisco, and probably more.
How much experience?
It runs the gamut. One of the things we do, and we think is one of the reasons that we have been successful, is we hire at all levels. So some of them are entry-level positions. Some of them are 10, 15 years experience positions. I will tell you that as a company, we hire based on talent before we hire on experience. So if we find somebody really smart and young, with just a couple years experience, but obviously way on the ball. We're a fairly young company and very entrepreneurial and really not interested in people who are set in their ways. And no offense to them, it's just that that's not how we do things. And so, it really runs the gamut.
Anybody else?
You're looking for flexibility and adaptability. Again, 3 years ago, Twitter was a twinkle, you know what I mean? And now it's, I think, pretty much a part of the job, to do that. The idea that you latch on to new things and that you are also can move quickly from one thing to another. While we're not a news service, a lot of things, because we are more efficient than we have been in the past, you have to be I'm going to need you to do 2 things or 3 things when you could have done 1 during a day, and be able to balance all that and accomplish a task. And the one caveat on that is, of course, I'm not going to expect it to be as maybe 360 as I would have expected it to be 5 years ago, but you have to be able to put out a decent job and know quickly how to research things. That's the one skill I think I've helped a lot of folks at the office with, which is how quickly to get information off the internet so that you can add context and add things to your story, or find sources very quickly for your stories. A very quick example was we had a B-25 that's for sale. If you want to buy a World War II bomber, I think it's, again, buy it. It's not in very good condition. But real quick, yeah, it needs a little bit of work. Real quick question to ask was, how much does a B-25 go for? I was dealing with a reporter who was not quite as flexible. And within 30 minutes, had talked to 2 experts who could tell me, help me price, and in fact knew the plane, and help me price it. And it was basically using a new invention called Google, and finding these folks, and quickly getting them on the phone. But it's that, can you find out how much a B-25 bomber goes for in 30 minutes or 15 minutes?
That's a great quiz for hiring.
Yeah, how much does a B-25 go for? Anybody?
A fully functioning one goes for about $700,000. A display one goes for about $250,000. The one that we have here at Owens Field is apparently worth $150 because it's in horrible shape.
I definitely go for fully functioning bomb.
Yeah, exactly. You want it, but that's what I'm talking about. Which is occasionally, and the other thing is you're going to get thrown a lot of curveballs, and being able to handle the curve and being able to handle that and say, I can do this. And if you don't, say, I don't, help me. That's the other part of it, is I cannot stand someone who says, boss, I can do it. And then I see them struggling 2 hours later saying, I really don't know how to do this. Ask me, because in 5 minutes I can show you, I'll show you how to fish, and you'll know how to fish from now on.
I'm going to answer from the other side, because I haven't done any hiring in 12 years, and I haven't been hired in a while.
I think one of the very important things is that you got a sense of this from Beth's answer is to find out about the culture of the organization before you interview. Because I had a job interview a year ago that didn't result in an offer, and there was a real personality mismatch between me and the hiring editor. And actually, the worst thing is that he was much more of a jerk than I was. That was the problem. In fact, I found out later from another person who was in on the interview that so-and-so believes that an aggressive reporter will be aggressive in the interview. And I said, well, that's all well and good, but frankly, I've been trying really hard to be much less of an asshole than I was when I was 22 years old, and I consider that a development on my part. I'm trying to be more mature and take things in stride and see both sides of things, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to be a jerk in the interview. And if that's what you were looking for, then that's that. But if I had really wanted that job, I certainly could have been a jerk, and been more aggressive in that interview, and it would have worked out better. But I didn't know going in that that's what this guy was like, and that's what they were looking for.
Sense of urgency, being able to manage your time, because as Beth and Andy talked about, David, is that you're not just doing an investigative piece. We can't give you the time just to do that. I remember when I was back in the central Illinois town covering that labor dispute, a New York Times reporter came in to do the big tell-all story on this labor dispute, and we went to lunch and we were talking and he asked me how many stories did I write a year, and I said, oh, I don't know, about one a day. And I said, how about you? He said, I think I've done 8 this year. 8 stories? Okay, that's good. Those jobs really don't exist anymore. And so here's what, as an investigative reporter, what you do is you're also a daily reporter, you're a beat reporter.
Reporter, Twitterer, Facebook.
Absolutely, you may be doing video. And loading that onto the website.
Or shooting digital.
Yeah, or shooting digital, absolutely. So you're less siloed, you're going to be doing more. And so you have to be able to balance your time to do your daily and find time to look into these stories to do, like you're talking about, to investigate these companies and to ask the questions, to go beyond just the daily news. So, you really got to be juggling.
Well, and two, I think the concept of taking time off so you can be a better reporter is crazy. I was the editor of the Business Journal in Washington, and there was some secret office in the building where our office was in Roslyn, and every now and then we would see Bob Woodward come in and go up to the 6th floor to this, whatever the office was. I don't know if we ever figured it out, but the Washington Post has about 9 million reporters, and you really don't develop a relationship with any byline because you don't see them very often.
That's a good point.
Except for Bob Woodward. He's all over that newspaper. He writes stories this big, he writes stories this big, he writes stories 3-4 times a week. Why? Because Bob Woodward gets the information that he gets because he writes stories all the time. I think if anybody's risen to the level of this profession who gets to, to contemplate your naval time off, it's him, and he's working the streets every single day.
And writing books.
And writing books. That's why he gets what he gets. That's why he gets access. That's why, because he does all of those stories that help people understand that he really does know what he's talking about. Anyway.
I think that's a great point, and that the whole idea is, a lot of people talk about still, oh, I want to write these, take time and write these pieces, and it's really, in this day and age of what's on Twitter, what's on now, you've got to be able to move quickly, and it says give that context. I already know what the score is. I already know what the headline is. Tell me the next thing. Give me your expertise. Again, quick example. Saturday morning, I wake up. I discovered that I cover some of the utilities on there. I discovered the electric companies got an approval to raise its rates. So nobody has seen this.
So in 2 hours before my daughter's soccer game, I went, got my clips, got a whole bunch of background and stuff that I'd written, called a couple of people to confirm some things, make sure I was understanding a couple of things correctly, and was able to produce a story and then coach her soccer game. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't written, if I had not written 5 or 10 stories on this subject before and been able to give that context. I could have just written this and said, your electric bills are going up. I had a lot of lies, a lot of other things, and do all that. And as I said, I was able to do it in a couple of hours.
And that versatility is key. I've seen John King from CNN play shortstop and make phone calls at the same time. Doug?
I was going to point out John King, because I, of course, worked with him at the AP Bureau in Providence. And John never, before cell phones almost, never had a phone not in his ear talking to someone. I was going to mention that was another example of that idea that you're just constantly working sources when it comes on.
I don't think as an editor I ever heard one of my very best reporters, one of the best reporters I ever worked for, asking for time off, like, to work on a story. I don't think I ever heard the ones who really deserve that ever see that as something valuable to them. You know, to take time out of the news rotation to do.
Well, we appreciate all of you taking time out of your rotations to spend 90 minutes with us here. Any last questions from out there? Anybody got a burning thing? Anybody still want to be a sports reporter? Sports is a business.
It's a huge business.
Big business. I mean, for goodness sake, the guy who covers the game, he's doing cover the game tomorrow. He's at the trustee meeting for Ray Tanner's contract announcement. You know, he's covering money. Because Tanner's probably going to become the highest paid baseball coach in the country. So,
when you're number one, you can do that.
That's right, follow the money.
Follow the money. So, thank you all. I want to thank Bob and David and Andy and Beth, all of you joining us today. There is one last event in this ICOM week, as we have called it. I as in information, com as in communication, our two schools. Most of you are familiar with that by now. At 2 o'clock in this very same room, David Carr, Dr. David Carr, is the School of Library and Information Sciences guest. He's lecturing on communities of aspiration. Come figure that one out, too. We invite you to join us, and thank you for being here with us.